Can you imagine being with the love of your life for nearly 60 years, and then suddenly facing your first wedding anniversary without them? It's the kind of pain that most of us can only begin to comprehend. That moment when the calendar marks a day that used to be filled with shared memories, love, laughter, maybe even a quiet toast or handwritten note. And now it's just silent. If your heart just tugged a little, you're not alone, because that's exactly what happened to Dolly Parton, one of the most beloved and enduring voices in American music. Known for her sparkle, her humor, and her larger-than-life persona, Dolly has always been the bright light in the room. But behind that light was a steady, quiet presence who kept her grounded, her husband of 56 years, Carl Dean. Carl wasn't just Dolly's spouse, he was her sanctuary, a deeply private man. He shunned the spotlight so completely that many fans joked he was like a unicorn, frequently mentioned, rarely seen. But to Dolly, Carl was everything. He saw her before she became Dolly Parton, the superstar. He fell in love with the young woman behind the rhinestones, and their love endured every challenge that fame could throw their way. Carl passed away quietly, away from the cameras and headlines he'd always avoided. And when the first anniversary of their wedding rolled around after his death, Dolly was left with the daunting question so many widows and widowers face. How do you celebrate a bond that physically no longer exists, but emotionally, spiritually still lives within you? Dolly, in her trademark blend of grace and strength, didn't pretend the day wasn't coming. She didn't try to distract herself with work or social obligations. Instead, she made space for the loss. And more importantly, she made space for the love that still remained. She chose to remember Carl in ways that felt true to them as a couple, intimate, personal, deeply rooted in shared history. She began the day with something many of us overlook in our digital world, a box of old photo albums. Not the curated Instagram grids or filtered Facebook memories. These were the real deal. Faded prints, creased edges, black and white photos that told the story of two lives intertwined. Dolly once shared that she and Carl didn't take many pictures over the years because he disliked the attention. But the ones they had, they were treasures. Candid shots in their Tennessee backyard, laughing over coffee, moments no paparazzi ever captured, just quiet love, frozen in time. As she turned the pages, she wasn't just reminiscing, she was connecting. Grief experts often say that when we look at old photos or relive memories, our brains don't just recall, they re-experience. For a few moments, we are back in that world, and for Dolly, those morning hours flipping through albums became a bridge to Carl. She didn't stop there. In a gentle act of ritual, she lit a candle, one small flame, flickering quietly in the early morning light. That simple gesture holds so much power. Across cultures and religions, candles have long symbolized remembrance, spirit, and soul. For Dolly, it wasn't about spectacle, it was about presence. As the flame danced, it was almost as if Carl was there, watching, smiling, and then she made his coffee. Black, just the way he liked it. She placed it on the table across from her, where he used to sit. That empty chair, once filled with conversation and laughter, now served as a symbol of love that never truly leaves us. To complete the moment, she played some Elvis, not just because it felt nostalgic, but because Elvis was one of Carl's favorites. In fact, Dolly has often said that Carl had a real love for old-school rock and roll. He always loved a slow morning, she said softly, so I gave him one. That one sentence says more than 1,000 love songs ever could, because in that quiet, mindful morning, Dolly wasn't just grieving, she was honoring. She was recreating the essence of a man who shaped her life for nearly 6 decades, and in doing so, she wasn't letting go. She was holding on in a way that nurtures rather than hurts. Later in the day, something powerful happened. Dolly went to her piano, not for an audience, not for a new album, just for herself. And for Carl. She played a few chords, let the emotions rise, and then began to write. The result? A song. But not one she plans to share. At least, not yet. It's not a performance, she explained. It's a prayer. Think about that for a moment. In a world where so much of our grief becomes performative or posted, Dolly kept this deeply private. That song is a conversation between her and Carl, nothing more. And when the sun began to set, a golden Tennessee sunset they'd watched together hundreds of times, Dolly walked out to a quiet little spot on their property, a worn wooden bench beneath the trees. That's where they used to sit together. No press, no fame. Just Dolly, Carl, and the sound of birds and breeze. She sat there alone. But not really. Because the spirit of someone you love that deeply never really leaves. Many of us imagine grief as a tidal wave, something that hits hard and then fades. But in reality, it's more like a tide. It rises, it falls. It flows into your life in unexpected moments, like a song lyric, a morning routine, a favorite meal. That's why rituals matter. They anchor us when everything else feels adrift. And this isn't just emotional talk. Therapists agree. Dr. Melinda Sloan, a licensed grief counselor, notes that creating rituals around loss, especially on anniversaries, can help the brain process grief in a healthier way. They give shape to the chaos, she says. Rituals offer predictability in the unpredictable landscape of mourning. You don't need to be a country legend to do this. Anyone can. Maybe it's lighting a candle, or playing their favorite song, or baking that dessert they loved, or even writing them a letter, just like Dolly wrote that song. That's something. Experts actually recommend journaling to a lost loved one allows us to externalize feelings that are often too tangled to express out loud. And here's another gentle tip from grief psychologists. Prepare for the day. Don't let it sneak up on you. Mark it on your calendar. Make a plan. Even if it's a plan to be alone and cry, when you take ownership of the day, you reduce the anxiety that often accompanies it. Think of it this way. If grief is a storm, planning is your umbrella. Dolly's experience teaches us something even deeper, that love, when real, doesn't end. It just shifts. It shows up in memories, in gestures, in rituals that keep us tethered to the ones we've lost. The world sees Dolly Parton as a superstar, but that day, she was just a woman remembering her husband, and there's something profoundly comforting about that. In the stillness of that morning before the world awoke and the buzz of cameras and music and fanfare began again, Dolly Parton was not a legend. She was a widow in mourning, standing in the quiet echo of a partnership that had been her anchor for over half a century. For all the fame, all the accolades, all the albums and accolades that bear her name, Carl Dean was the one person who never looked at her as Dolly the icon. To him, she was just Dolly, the woman he met at a laundromat in Nashville back in 1964, when neither of them knew what the future would hold. And somehow, even as that future became bigger and brighter than either of them could have imagined, they held on to that simple truth. When someone loses a partner after decades of marriage, it's not just the person who disappears. It's the rhythm of everyday life. It's the second toothbrush by the sink, the way the remote is always placed on the right side of the couch, the particular creak in the floor where he used to walk every morning. It's in the unspoken glances over breakfast, the shared jokes that only the two of them understood, the knowledge that someone else had memorized your daily habits and loved you through every change. That's what Dolly lost when Carl passed, not just a husband, but a mirror of her life's most private, grounded moments. When she woke up that morning, their wedding anniversary, she didn't wake up to flowers or whispered wishes. She woke up to silence. A silence that wasn't peaceful, but heavy. A silence that filled the room like a presence, not an absence. Grief often feels that way. It doesn't arrive with loud sobs or dramatic breakdowns. It shows up in the quiet, in the routine that now feels empty, in the chair that remains untouched. And Dolly, in her honesty and vulnerability, didn't run from that silence. She met it, she invited it in, and she let it guide her through the day. That kind of courage is rare, especially for someone who spent her life performing, bringing joy to millions. There's a certain pressure, even among the famous, to always be on, to smile through pain, to hide the messiness of real emotion. But Dolly has never been one to shy away from truth. Her songwriting has always reflected the rawness of life, heartbreak, hope, poverty, faith, forgiveness. And in her own grief, she lived that truth. As she sat with her memories, leafing through old photographs, she wasn't just reminiscing. She was re-entering moments of joy. Every snapshot brought back a story. Maybe it was that road trip they took in their old camper van long before she was known around the world. Or the birthday party where Carl insisted on grilling despite the rain just to make her laugh. Or the countless quiet evenings on their porch, sipping sweet tea, saying nothing at all. Each image wasn't just a frozen moment. It was a heartbeat, a pulse of their life together. That's the thing about real love. It doesn't reside in grand gestures or public declarations. It lives in the small, repeated moments, the dailiness. The consistency, lighting that candle, such a small act, became something sacred. It was a ritual not of grief alone, but of presence. In many traditions, fire symbolizes spirit, illumination, remembrance. That flickering flame may seem insignificant to an outsider, but to Dolly, it was a way of saying, I remember you. You're still here. Sometimes that's all we need to do in the face of overwhelming loss. Just acknowledge that the love didn't vanish. It changed form. It lingers in the air, in the spaces once shared, in the habits we keep even after the person is gone. Pouring that cup of coffee was perhaps the most heartbreakingly beautiful moment of all. It wasn't about nostalgia. It was about honoring the everyday intimacy of their relationship. She didn't need to go to a grave or make a grand public statement. She simply recreated their morning ritual, something so mundane, yet so personal, and allowed herself to feel both the loss and the love embedded in it. Making his coffee wasn't just a symbolic gesture. It was an act of devotion. A way to say, you mattered, you still do. And that's the truth that so many grieving partners face. The world may move on. Friends might stop checking in. The funeral flowers wither, but the love, the connection, remains stubborn and true. Even science acknowledges this. Neurologically, the bonds we form with those closest to us remain etched in our neural pathways. That's why we dream of them, why we sometimes swear we see them in crowds, why we feel their absence as a physical ache. Dolly's grief, like anyone's, wasn't about letting go. It was about learning to live with the new shape of love. The piano, too, became a vessel. She didn't need a studio, a producer, or a chart-topping goal. She sat down and played not for fame, but for healing. The song she wrote that day wasn't meant for us. It wasn't meant for awards or applause. It was meant for him. It was her way of saying everything words couldn't. Music, after all, has always been Dolly's first language. And that song, private, sacred, became a conversation between two souls still connected. As evening came and the light softened, Dolly stepped outside. That bench beneath the trees held more than just wood and nails. It held history. It was the place where their lives had been most real, away from lights, cameras, adoring fans. Just two people watching sunsets, talking about nothing and everything. Sitting there alone wasn't about sadness. It was about memory, about honoring that shared life, about being willing to feel. There's a quiet bravery in choosing not to run from pain, in choosing to honor the one you've lost through presence, not avoidance, in refusing to let their memory fade into silence. Dolly's rituals weren't elaborate or extravagant. They were intimate, honest, human. And in that honesty, she gave others permission to grieve in their own way, to find comfort in memory, to believe that love, real love, doesn't die. Because it doesn't. It transforms. It becomes part of the fabric of who we are. It whispers in our thoughts. It tugs at us in the middle of ordinary days. It makes us laugh when we remember a joke only they would have understood. It keeps us company in the quiet. That's what Dolly understood. That's what she lived. And that's why, on what could have been the loneliest day of her life, she created a sanctuary out of memory. She proved that even in loss, love has a language. It speaks through candles and coffee, through photos and songs, through empty chairs that still feel full. It's not the end of a story, just the beginning of a new chapter, one where love, though invisible, is everywhere. Maybe you've lost someone too. Maybe this story is stirring something in you. A memory, a smile, even a tear. If so, know this: you're not alone. Grief is universal. But so is love. And if Dolly's story reminds us of anything, it's that love continues, in songs, in silence, in sunrises and slow mornings. So, I want to hear from you. What's one way you remember someone you've lost? Is there a special place you go, a song you listen to, or a dish you cook just for them? Maybe it's something quiet and simple, just like Dolly's ritual. Share it. In the comments. You never know. Your story could help someone else find a bit of light on a dark day, and if this video moved you, you'll absolutely want to watch our next story. It's about Keanu Reeves, another soul who turned personal heartbreak into compassion and meaning. His journey is just as human, just as raw, and just as inspiring. Before you go, if you believe in love that endures, click that like button. And if you want more stories that celebrate the human spirit, stories about healing, resilience, and the power of connection, hit that subscribe button and tap the bell so you don't miss any future videos. Thank you for spending these moments with us. And remember what Dolly Parton said so simply, so beautifully: love doesn't end, it evolves.